Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib. I have my co-host JP with me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well, thanks.
Wonderful. And we are joined by a wonderful guest, Dr. Sam Shay. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. We are honored to have you here. We're honored to dig into your area of expertise, which is decoding your DNA. And I think this is a very important thing for our listeners to begin to understand what their individual DNA is trying to tell them and kind of how they're built and how to live in the world based on their personal DNA markers, their personal DNA epigenetic markers, and specific SNPs. And we'll get into what this all means. And if you're ready to test your DNA, how do you then read that DNA report so that you know how to make changes that are actually valuable for you on an individualized basis? So we're excited to dig into all of that science. But before we do, I want to ask you, because I know that you have a very unique story in how you experienced a lot of health struggles through your childhood and progressed into becoming a doctor to figure out kind of your own health as part of your journey to help others. So let's begin with your health journey and where it all kind of began. I imagine it was around age 6, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's age 6 is when everything kind of took a turn. And just for context, the structure of my personal story should sound very familiar to a lot of people who, if you've interviewed a lot of natural health or functional health practitioners, it's so cliche, it's called the Chiron, the wounded healer.
Yes.
And even the Greeks had this cliche that they just decided, just put it in the stars, like just stop talking about it, it's there, you know. And the Chiron, for any people who don't know, he was in Greek mythology, he was the wise outsider. He was neither God nor human. He was actually both chthonic and he was the offspring of the oldest gods and a water god as well. But he was like half centaur, half human. Well, he wasn't really a centaur. He was always on the outside, but he was the great teacher. All the great heroes, he was a teacher and a healer. And he was the wounded healer, wounded, physically by an arrow, but also he was always the outsider. Like he was socially wounded, but despite that, he kept wanting to help humanity and help everybody. So it's only Chiron and Hestia are basically the two unambiguously beloved gods in the entire Greek pantheon. Everyone else is just a pyromaniac on Mount Olympus, just doing their thing, but only Chiron and Hestia. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and the home. She gave up her throne in Olympus just to be with the people. I don't know of any others, honestly, who are as beloved as they are. So I take some solace in that. And the arc is the wounded healers. You were born into a situation either where your own personal health was compromised or of a loved one or a family or a friend, or there's some formative event that you're like, you know what, I'm going to devote my life to healing. And I'm going to go through all of these trials and trying to figure out all of the things so that I can reduce the suffering of others in a rapidly shorter amount of time than what either I went through or saw others in my circle go through, which inspired me to become a healer in the first place. So that's my story. The details, that's a similar story you'll hear over and over again. My details just differ, but the arc is the same. So in summary, the short version of the details is that at age 6, I grew up in the 80s. In fact, I'm doing a stand-up comedy. I'm writing my second stand-up comedy show right now. And yes, I'm also a professional stand-up comic. That's my advocacy work, and my educational outreach work is to educate through the Trojan, speaking of Greek and Roman, the Trojan horse of comedy by telling the truth about certain subjects through comedy. I'm writing about what it's like to grow up with chronic illness and my journey through to becoming a functional medicine practitioner. And I'm talking about the 80s through the lens of my breakfast. And the 80s I summarize as equal parts nostalgic and sinister. And that what we were sold as wholesome was actually quite toxic. And just the breakfast, like growing up on boxed kids cereals, like, oh my God, it's got vitamins and minerals. Like, yeah, and like loads of sugar and chemicals and all the rest of it. Lunches were like SpaghettiOs and ramen noodles, and like you're knowing nods from both of you. Okay, yes.
I grew up in the 80s as well. We both grew up in the 80s, and I still remember all the ads. Part of a complete breakfast and
complete breakfast,
right?
yeah. And then it's changed now to part of this fun breakfast.
Of course,
it's gotten
it
even
has.
more Orwellian. I remember like the box cereal. Remember, it used to be called Sugar Smacks. Then it went to Honey Smacks, and now it's just Smacks.
Oh my goodness!
Right, and then you go to summer camp, and these little box cereals were like currency. You just basically sugar was currency at summer camp. So I not only was raised on an absolutely terrible diet, and genetically I realized why I was so terribly. Only when I ran my genetics when I was in 2000 when I was 35, I ran my genetics. I would have been anything to run my genetics at 5 as opposed to 35. So I had the terrible food, but also this was the 80s, so we had a lot of emotional and parental neglect that was camped as resilience training. It's what made us kids latchkey strong. Yeah. And then also violence and humiliation and at school wasn't taken seriously. And unfortunately, I was like the smallest kid in the school, at times the second smallest, but it didn't really matter. But the other formative things, my parents had a nuclear divorce. In the 80s, divorce was relatively rare. And so me and my siblings were caught in the blast radius of that divorce. And that triggered, my parents handled it completely the wrong ways, weaponizing the children against each other. And it would just create a lot of strife and pain at home. And then you have the violence, humiliation at school, and no parent looking out. They were just looking out for themselves. And then I developed severe crippling insomnia to the point where it stunted my growth. And then being short then led to more negative attention at school. And I coped with video game addiction and sugar addiction. And I had really terrible digestive problems that were both embarrassing and really painful, and also created social strife and anxiety, depression, and so on. And I was just thrust in front of a television so that I would not interfere with my parents trying to restart their lives in their 40s. And I was supposed to be the third generation medical doctor. Both my parents were medical doctors, even bonus psychiatrists, which adds a whole other layer of hilarity to it. So yeah, I know
You don't have to do stand up. You just have to tell the truth.
well, actually, when people ask me how do you do stand up, it says never aim for funny, aim for truth.
Mm-hmm.
And truth is stranger than fiction. It's just never find the truth in the funny. Always find the funny in the truth. And if you reflect on all the best stand up comics, you always laugh to what was true.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you end up with like fart jokes and knock knocks and like slapstick, which has its place. Thankfully, a lot smaller place these days. But yeah, comedy is the best Trojan horse for truth. And I actually watched sitcoms growing up because I also have Asperger's syndrome, which I didn't find out till I was in my late 30s. I was watching, and I don't understand, why are people lying to me? Why are they being deceptive? I'm a robot just articulating what I see. And I have no social software, which again contributed to the violence and humiliation at school. And there was no language for, Asperger's back then. I mean, except in academic circles. I mean, Dr. Asperger died in 1981, and it was like or maybe it was 1980, and like his work was first published in English in 81 or something like that. So it just created this giant maelstrom of all sorts of health and social and emotional problems. And I actually got into comedy because I would watch sitcoms, one, to have some sort of levity in my life, but I actually became I watched sitcoms like an anthropologist and a sociologist to understand, here's some low resolution archetypes of human behavior that I can then stitch together to create prediction models for people. And because what is a sitcom? It literally stands for situational comedy, where you have archetypes, whether it's Al Bundy or Homer Simpson or Carl Winslow or whoever, like they are the same character. Their whole family, everyone's the same character, but they're just thrown in different situations to see how they respond. No different than the Greek gods. It's the same archetypal structure, just put into a comedy and with less superpowers. So I would study comedy to try to understand human behavior and family structure. Now, it can backfire because trying to learn psychology from Beavis and Butthead is like trying to learn family structure from their children. Like,
I was to say, Al Bundy is not the person you want.
No, it's totally like, and at least I was intelligent enough to understand it was satire. And to some extent, The Simpsons was a form of satire, but that's kind of was a bit fuzzy at times, whether they were being serious or they were being satire. So I was supposed to be a third generation medical doctor. And again, my parents being psychiatrists of the 80s, their answer was to my depression, anxiety, and all my health problems was you're a SSRI deficient, attention seeking nuisance. And we're not going to look at what's actually causing you physical problems and physical pain, from injuries, from being assaulted. And we're not going to look at your diet. We're certainly not going to look at anything we've contributed. So I had to make a decision in high school that pivoted into natural medicine, despite my father's father being one of the most famous gastroenterologists in the United States. Published 300 scientific articles. Was the founding director of the Fels Cancer Research Center in 1937. Blah blah blah. My father's famous. Blah blah blah. It's. I was like, nope. The options I was given for what I was dealing with were not the Western medical model for what I was dealing with was not appropriate toolkit. And I'm very clear that like the toolkits for Western and natural medicine, they're for different purposes, and just the toolkit for them was not appropriate for me. And the way I can make that's a whole other long form discussion, but in simple terms, the philosophy of Western medicine emerged out of triage out of World War I, where are you in an emergency? Like, are you going to die or lose a function of a limb or your eyes or your sound or your hair or whatever? Are you going to die or not? If you're not, okay, go over there. Here's a painkiller if we have any and stop complaining because we have real problems. So the philosophy of Western medicine is, can we bring someone from emergency to stabilization, from crisis to stable? That's the philosophy of Western medicine. And there is an attending toolkit, surgery, drugs, x-rays, whatever it is, that is useful and appropriate if they get there in time and don't screw up. And it's the right tool. So it's kind of like the fire department. If they get there in time and don't screw up, you can save the structure of the house with axes and fire hoses, axes being surgery, fire, water being drugs. They can save the structure of the house, but the house is left an absolute mess. But you save the house.
This is explaining the importance of the diagnostician in an acute setting and just how good you need to be in figuring out what's wrong and identifying and fixing that thing. But in an acute setting, that works. Whereas in a chronic setting, it probably doesn't work nearly as well.
Well, we can blend some of the technology. So functional medicine, I define as the best of Western medicine's lab diagnostics.
Agreed.
With the best of natural medicine's nutrition and lifestyle diet intervention.
That's exactly right. You're marrying the two together. Wisdom of the old world lifestyle-based focus with the best of what technology and diagnostic tools can provide to us.
100%.
But it's also a mindset shift away from what you said is the sort of the outcropping of World War I, which is we're not going to deal with you until you have a problem. Because if you don't have a problem, then there's nothing for us to make money on and do.
Correct.
Whereas I think most people, when you're 17 years old and you get your first car, what's the one thing they tell you? Change the oil every 3,000 miles, So let's get out there and use this, our own engines and take care of them so we never have to get in front of the medical system that's only going to care when we're sick. Be healthy, figure out how to prevent things. Same way you don't want the fire department traipsing through your house with a fire hose and an axe. Well, why don't you have a smoke detector and have like a sprinkler system in your house?
And a general contractor to come in and check on it and to make sure
and make sure the batteries are in the smoke detector. Yeah, we've tortured that analogy to
I'll torture one little extra bit, and then we'll move on. So our Western medicine philosophy is to bring you from crisis to stability. Natural medicine or functional medicine, integrated medicine, yes, there's nuances between them, but in the general category, is not from crisis to stability. It's from chronic to normal to optimal. It's that journey. And it's different tools. And the problem is not that one toolkit is wrong or the other. The problem is mission creep in encroaching into the opposite sides of the sandbox. That's the problem. I have no business in an emergency room. None. Zero. Maybe as moral support. That's it. To cheer on the surgeon. That's it. That's all I can do. But it's the mission creep of having the wrong tools being applied to the wrong side of the sandbox.
You bring up a really good point because you get these social media doctors who get on and they'll sit and they'll say, oh, what are they going to do with a naturopath or a chiropractor in the emergency room when somebody comes in with in an acute MI?
Nothing. Next question.
Nothing. Thank you. But what are you going to do when the person comes in and has Crohn's disease or has high blood pressure? You're trying to apply that same acute care problem or solving strategy to a situation you're not really suited for. That's where you really want to go talk to a naturopath or a chiropractor or somebody who's focused on, as you said, getting you from that chronically deregulated state back into homeostasis and then optimize it.
100%. And we see this you see the same philosophy applied correctly and incorrectly in genetics as well. There's medical genetics and then there's functional genetics.
Yes.
And you see that the philosophies, and it's the same thing, like it's almost the same difference between Pasteur and Buchan, where you've got, is it one germ causing the disease, like one gene causing the disease, or is it the terrain or the milieu of the environment? And also, like, you've got about the inflammatory gene. No, there's like 16 major inflammatory genes. There's hundreds of them that directly or indirectly influence inflammation, but there's 16 major ones that are up top. I'm looking at inflammation as such, not a singular gene. And there are cases where you have one gene causes a one hardwired thing, like whether it's trisomy 21 or you got a Huntington's disease constellation thing going on. It's the problem of mission creep, where you've got a couple real cases of real genetic emergencies or genetic hardwired things that then they extrapolate to everything else. And this is epigenetics is basically functional medicine for genetics. And we look at genetics from a completely different lens, where we're looking at the whole playing field of genetics and how clusters of genes not only interact with themselves, but interact with other clusters of genes in a holistic model. And different gene clusters have higher and lower priorities than other gene clusters, which is a concept that not many people look at functional genetics understand, because when they look at their reports from so many of these other companies, they're like, here is 300 genes with their 300 attending health tips with no apparent prioritization, and people get overwhelmed and confused and ultimately paralyzed. I call that quietly 23andMe syndrome. And there's not a map. And that's the difference between functional genetics and medical genetics. And we've got also, like, people think about genetics testing. There's four types. And medical genetics is one of them. The first type of genetics testing is like, what percentage Irish are you? That's genealogy.
So this is like ancestry typing,
ancestry
DNA
exactly,
type of thing. Yeah.
And you want to know what percentage Irish you are if Conor McGregor is fighting. Like, that's important then. Fair. By the way, when I watched the McGregor Mayweather fight in a bar in Wellington, New Zealand, and that was thrilling. That was wow. Super fans. Okay, anyway, tangent. So anyway, only get your genealogy checked when Conor McGregor is fighting. Second type of gene test is, who's your daddy? That's paternity testing. That's not what we're talking about. Third type of testing is medical genetics, which is what we just talked about, looking for legit, hardwired, like permanent genetic things and that are there. Now, some people talk about, well, what about BRCA2? Well, 50% of all women who have BRCA2 don't get breast cancer. 50% do. So then what is determining that? That's not deterministic. It's probabilistic.
So funny thing about BRCA2.
Yeah.
Is I actually did a little bit of research into this because we had on our podcast Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who is a proponent of the mitochondrial theory or metabolic theory of cancer.
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you start looking at the various different, what we'll call genetic predispositions to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They are either DNA repair mechanisms that have become problematic,
mm-hmm.
or they're actually, the genes have a role in the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
So the protein that gets created has a metabolic function versus some other enzyme or, something else. So most cancer genes, where they say, oh, you have the gene for this, are actually the reason they have incomplete penetrance is because they're affecting your mitochondria in a negative way, but that's recoverable. With the right approach, lifestyle, et cetera, you can sort of overcome it. And as a result, you're not going to have cancer. That's why cancer is so dialed in or correlated with BMI, VO2 max, and other what we'll call metabolic states.
100%.
Anyway.
No. So actually, this connects directly back to the genetics because the chief science officer, Dr. Paul Beaver, he's the one who founded FitGenes, the company that I use and that I now educate for and distribute for in the West. He started FitGenes because both of his parents got cancer. And he was a PhD engineer, not a doctor, which is to his credit. And you're giving the thumbs up, JP. Okay, you're biased, but we'll forgive you for that.
Was he an aeronautical engineer?
I think, what was he? I have to double check. I want to say, I don't actually remember. I don't want to misspeak, but he was absolute genius. So what he did is he switched his engineering mind. Now, just to be clear, what is an engineering mind? You figure out an exact order to a process that is predictable and reliable to create predictable, reliable outcomes every time. That's an engineer's mind. Would you disagree with that, JP?
It's a reasonable.
Okay, reasonable. Okay.
Characteristic, yeah.
So what he did is he read, and this is true, over 5,000 genetics articles over the span of several decades. And he figured out, because he was concerned about his health, his kids' health, and his grandkids' health, because both of his parents got cancer. And he figured out that genes have a priority and that he's not looking for the cancer gene, the heart disease gene, the neurodegeneration gene, the stroke gene, the diabetes gene. He's looking for the drivers of all diseases. And the drivers, he found there are 7 main drivers in order of priority: inflammation, free radical damage scavenging in the mitochondria. Because just to be a little nerdy, a little extra nerdy, there's 3 major SOD and genes, superoxide dismutase, 1, 2, and 3. Well, 95% of all free radicals are generated in the mitochondria. So he's only interested in SOD2, which is the superoxide dismutase gene of the mitochondria. The other ones, doesn't really care. So this is what he means by prioritization. Even the SOD genes have a priority, SOD2, for example. So then you got inflammation, free radical damage scavenging in the mitochondria, liver detox, phase 1, phase 2, vitamin D receptor, not synthesis, receptors. Getting vitamin D into the blood through sunlight supplements or food is half the battle. Getting it from blood into the cells is the important bit. Then it's methylation. Methylation is 5th. It's not first.
You mean MTHFR isn't the first thing that everybody needs to look at on their genetic test?
Well, it suffered from founder's effect.
Yeah.
That's why MTHFR has undue purchase in the zeitgeist, is because it was the first gene that really captured the imagination of the public. So it suffers like Xerox was a company, but now it's a verb.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Hoover, a company, it's a verb. It's
macrophage. Macrophage was first seen as inflammatory and not for the other 95% of their time when they're homeostatic, controlling and maintaining homeostasis.
Absolutely.
We think of them as inflammatory fighters and all that kind of stuff, but that's not what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, when I listened to Gary Brecka on Rogan in December 24, I was literally screaming into my podcaster player. I was like, "What are you doing?" Like I appreciate his perspective as a health actuarialist. Like that's an interesting perspective he's got, and he's a great teacher and articulator. Yes. I think he maybe oversimplified the genetics just a little bit. Just a bit. So when I get angry, I make a PowerPoint, and I went on 3 separate podcasts with all of my citations, disproving his theory. Oh, you need these 5 methylation genes. I'm like, no, absolutely not. Those are not even my top 5. So inflammation, free radical damage scavenging in the mitochondria, liver detox, vitamin D receptors, then methylation, then it's cardiovascular circulation and vessel integrity, then it's fat and energy metabolism. Those are the 7 drivers of all chronic diseases. And they're in an order of priority. Inflammation controls the things downstream of it. Free radical damage scavenging the mitochondria, then the things downstream. And then you stair step it. So this also solves...
There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of crossover there. Mitochondrial dysfunction leads to inflammation.
That is correct.
Inflammation leads back to mitochondrial dysfunction.
It's not perfect, but it is conceptually, it's useful enough to get people away from the, oh my God, I have 300 genes, I have to do everything equal and important. Like practically, you are correct, JP. I put MN SOD as one of the most important inflammatory genes, even though technically it's a free radical scavenging gene in the mitochondria. I also had a debate with Dr. Beaver at a Fitchings conference of his that I was lecturing at. I had a debate with him in front of everybody, collegial, we're friends, that VDR receptors were actually more important than TNF alpha, interleukin 6, and the interleukin 10s. I made that argument because we had a debate about it. It was actually, I wish we recorded it, but the reason why I say that is because VDRs, what I have found clinically is that 100% of all chronically ill clients I have ever worked with only one exception, had variants in VDR1 and VDR2, either double reds or double yellows or red yellow. The only person that ever had chronic illness that had double greens was a woman who had horrific stress of a chronic and acute enduring nature, of which I shall not describe, that would have driven anyone to chronic illness. So the kind of exception proves the rule. I then went back to Dr. Beaver and I said, hey, you have access to the master database and also access to the other practitioners who run lots of these tests. I have a theory that VDR 1 and 2 variations are the most reliable predictor of risk for chronic illness. Would you please go and check? He came back to me, I don't remember if it was a month or 3 later, but he said, you're absolutely right. There's a correlation there. And then what does vitamin D do? Well, yeah, bone density a little bit. That's nice. But what it actually does is control, depending on what articles you read, between 3 and 5% of your entire human genome, most of it related to immune dysfunction, immune control, and inflammation control. So even I also have debated with Dr. Beaver over his prioritization. And VDR, in my opinion, vitamin D is more about inflammation control than it is about bone density.
Yeah, the vitamin D receptor is a major player, and I think we know that if they're going to put it in your milk, it's something that they want you to make certain you have. But one of the things I just want to, the thing that's screaming in my head is that what you're really talking about are the hallmarks of aging. That each one of these hallmarks and there's 12 of them. You go through its genomic instability, its telomere length, its epigenetics, its mitochondrial dysfunction and cellular senescence and stem cell exhaustion. All of those are actually tied to various different genes that how they're being expressed. So it's epigenetics at the end of the day, how they're being expressed and whether or not you have the right code. So that's genomic instability and whether you have a mutation are really tied together. And every disease you get, if it's a chronic disease, is associated with aging. Aging is the biggest risk factor for every chronic disease. And so, it's all ties together. If you can show how you can either restore or somehow assist in ameliorating an aging process, you're going to make somebody healthier.
Absolutely. And so we're going to like, how do we actually figure out, we talk about like the best of Western medicine lab diagnostics and the best of natural medicine interventions. One reason I love genetics testing, and yes, I do other testing like mitochondria. I helped design the largest mitochondria test in the world, the Nutristat. I trained with Dr. Kalish for 4 years. I trained with the Institute for Functional Medicine. Also, Dr. Naviz, I used to be a functional neurologist with the Carrick Institute for 8, 9, maybe 10 years. I can't remember. I used to write questions for the board. And when I went to chiropractic school and just drowned myself in functional neurology and nutrition and all the rest of it.
It's the best. I love it.
And just and then got an acupuncture degree when I was living abroad, and then just tried to synergize all these different things. And after going through all that training of all the different disciplines, I don't call myself a health nut. I call myself a health mutt. And just a combo. And I realized that the one thing that was missing across all my education was, what is someone's genetic blueprint? Because everything you just said, JP, I 100% agree with. And what people are missing, though, is what their genes are to know where are the vulnerabilities and also how to live optimally. Genetics is how do I live optimally? And then where are the weak points I need to address before? Because people are like, I don't want to know. Well, you'll find out whether you want to or not. You're going to find out anyway. And even going back to the whole thing of metabolic theory of cancer, I was sitting in Dr. Campbell's biochemistry class in chiropractic school in 2005. And this is 2005. I'm just sitting in class and he talked about bioenergetics, that the mitochondria makes 36 units of ATP and and all the cells in the liver, yes, makes 38 because of a special reason, blah, blah, blah. But just 36, just for round numbers. And then, if through aerobic glycolysis, you go to oxygen and your mitochondria and like the 50 odd nutrients to make that mitochondria work, and you get it's 36 units of energy and no lactic acid, or I call no smoke. You don't get pollution. But in anaerobic glycolysis, where you don't burn the carbs, say, in the mitochondria, you burn it in the streets. It's like burning garbage in the streets for a little bit of heat and a little bit of light. You get 2 units of ATP and 2 units of smoke, which I call lactic acid, which I call smoke.
Perfect.
And yes, there's some super nerds out there. So technically, it's actually minus 2 ATP when you put it back through the Cori cycle. And like, ignore all that. Just make the numbers easy, bro. So you got 36 units of energy from 1 molecule of glucose in the mitochondria, 2 units of energy, 1 molecule from burning it in the anaerobically and outside the mitochondria. Then he made this offhand comment that, what's interesting? That cancer cells have on average between 16 and 20 times the amount of insulin receptors than normal cells. And he just went on. He just breezed over that. And I sat there. I was like, wait a minute, I can do math. What the average of 16 to 20 is 18. What is 2 times 18? 36. Oh my God. That must mean that cancer is caused by mitochondrial failure. Now, this is 2005. I've never heard of the metabolic theory of cancer at that point. No one ever talked to this about me. I just sat in biochem class and figured out there's a connection between mitochondrial failure.
Well, there's a guy I have to introduce you to. His name was Otto Warburg.
I've heard this name. Yes. I've heard this name. Afterwards, I heard about it. Not then, but I heard it after. Because I was just like, the numbers don't lie. So when you're talking about the metabolic theory of cancer, I was just sitting there in biochem class. I was like, okay, I don't even know what to do with this information, but it's there. So then I got super interested in the mitochondria. That sparked the mitochondria. Then it was married to the genetics. Then when I discovered the genetics testing in 2016. So with genetics, the thing that people are missing is their actual their blueprint. What is their genetic risk and what are their genetic optimals? And I like to say, I'm a fan of reality. I want to know what my genetic reality is. So if you want to understand genetics, there's 2 realities. What are the genes what are the drivers of chronic illness? And then what are the genes of diet? And those are the 2, and obviously they intersect in some meaningful ways, but just that's the easy way to think about it. You have the genes of diet and then the genes of longevity, which also, if they go sideways, like the inflammation, free radical damage, liver detox, methylation, vitamin D receptors, etc., when those go sideways from either conscious lifestyle choice or unfortunate circumstance, either way, your genes will respond to bad circumstance or bad choices. It's those drivers that will then poke on the quote-unquote disease genes. The quote-unquote disease genes are downstream of the drivers. That's why they're called drivers. So what is the strategy? You figure out the upstream drivers and you optimize your epigenetics and your lifestyle to make those genes in those driver clusters behave as green-like as possible. They may have red and yellow dots galore. Of the 16 inflammatory genes, I have 14 of them as red and yellow dots, which also explains why I was so chronically ill, even though people around me seem to be fine with a similar lifestyle. Because my genes may be much more vulnerable as a hyper-inflamer. That's a term I made up. I don't know if that's a real genetic term or not. So if you know your genetic playbook and you've got red and yellow dots galore like I do, those genes will never be green unless I'm dumb enough to inject CRISPR into my bicep, which has happened. Go onto YouTube or go onto Google and put in Russian dude CRISPR bicep and you'll freak out. See this like 3-foot tall bicep. Don't do it. Your red and yellow dots will never be green, but you can, through lifestyle and diet and proper living, you can make the red and yellow dots behave green-like. Make them behave green-like, but you have to be consistent because if you don't maintain the consistent good lifestyle, though green-like behavior will default backwards into their red and yellow settings. And that's the way to understand genetics. Genetics is not a switch, it's a dial. It's a dial. Medical genetics they treat genetics like a switch. It's either on or off. That's medical genetics, philosophically, and a couple of genes that are legit like that. But for functional genetics, epigenetics, it's a dial, which is good news because then we can do something about it. And that's where gene testing is really valuable as long as you pick the genes that you can do something about. And that was the thing that Dr. Beaver discovered also, what his criteria. Dr. Beaver had 4 major criteria for picking genes. Number 1, for the longevity drivers, that they had to, 1, be a gene that related directly to one of these 7 drivers. Number 2, they were the upstream, more important genes of these drivers, like SOD2, not SOD1 or SOD3. Number 3, there was at least 10% variation in the general population. So you're not looking for the 0.0001% thing, which is valuable for that person. And that's where medical genetic testing and PhD, that is valuable to that person. That is a specific, I would call that like emergency and kind of air quotes emergency.
It's orphan genetics.
Orphan genetics, yeah. So 10% minimum variation. And then the 4th criteria was that do the genes have peer-reviewed research in top-tier journals done on humans, not wombats or nematodes, that lifestyle, diet, nutrition alone can change the behavior of the the red and yellow dots to behave more green-like. Those were his 4 criteria. And it's not a lot of genes. This is like 150, maybe.
Out of the 20,000 that we have.
It's not a lot.
That's awesome.
Not a lot. So you whittled it down. And then also of those 150 odd genes, those are prioritized. And
just for the record, 150 genes being different is the difference between being a human and being a chimpanzee. So, 150 is still a large number of genes that if you can optimize 150 genes like that, and they fit that bill of being that upstream and that important, it's a lot.
So of those 150, how many are these primary drivers, like with regards to inflammation? About half of them.
About half are the 7 drivers. The other half are related to diet and exercise and some other meaningful physiological processes. So it started with just the drivers, and then he ventured into, okay, let's also look at food triggers. Like, are you genetically vulnerable to caffeine? Like I am, turns out. So this is like CYP1A2. This is a DORA2A1 or DORA2A2. That's one or the other. I can't remember. If you've got variations on which I do, then caffeine can create what's called, and I quote, caffeine-induced anxiety or depression. And so this is really important because, again, minimum 10%. You've got a whole bunch of people drinking coffee and they're jamming it full of coconut oil, calling it bulletproof, and it's totally backfiring, and they're conflating anxiety with energy. And I have helped people get off coffee just because I showed them the number. I was like, this is, you and coffee don't get along. And I literally spoke to someone last week. He was on bipolar medication and another form of psychiatric modulating medication. And he was taking monster drinks and 3 cups of coffee a day. And when I asked him to come off coffee for the genetics and some functional tests, when I followed a follow-up with him after the test, he's like, you know what? I just feel so much better. And I followed up, I showed him his genetics. And I was like, you should be off coffee. He's like, I know. I felt great ever since you told me to get off coffee just to do those other tests. And it's like, you mean I've been just like jacking up my mind from coffee? I was like, it was definitely a meaningful contributor. And we've got the proof right here. And like I think like this guy's quality of life exponentially improved just from the coffee genes, nothing else. So what Dr. Beaver did is he looked at dietary genes. So people want to talk about diet. I'm sure, as you've seen, is the most contentious subject in all of health. Everyone and their mother has a different opinion depending on the time of day. So you've got the diet of genetics. Now, if people know what their reality is, you can actually customize your diet as a foundation according to your genetics, and then you can adapt other dietary concerns on top of it. People are missing the foundation. So to me, you've got the dietary foundation is number 1. What is your carb tolerance? And you can actually determine this. And it's not through 23andMe or Ancestry or any of the other variation-based tests. It's through copy number analysis of the AME1 gene. Copy number analysis is a 3-dimensionality to genetics that no one really understands or has heard about, much less can actually clinically apply. So copy number analysis is you're not looking at the variation or the green, yellow, red dot of the gene. You're looking at the number of duplicates of the gene. So the AME1 gene is the gene that generates salivary amylase to break down carbohydrates in your saliva. That's the first step to carb digestion. You don't do it, you run into problems. So imagine your gut is a fort and you've got carbs, Vikings charging the fort. This is the Middle Ages. And the Vikings are carbs. Now, you want as many cannons as possible mowing down the Vikings. The version of the cannon is not really that relevant. The AME1 gene is one of the genes where the difference between red and yellow and green is actually not that much. It doesn't really matter. It's the number of cannons. I'd rather have 10 red cannons than 1 green cannon. So you can have up to about 20 copies of this AME1 gene. So if someone has more copies, they can mow down more carbs. Well, I was eating when, remember, I'm a functional medicine doctor. I was 35. I had, I knew the names of all my farmers and their chickens. It was all organic. It was local. It was all that stuff. The quinoa was grown in the South Island, and it was all this wonderful thing. And I was still having this digestive energy and mood variation swings throughout the day. And then I got my genetics results back, and I have, of the 20 copies you can have, I had a grand total of 2, second lowest possible. I was having a more Mediterranean style diet, which is like 5 through 8 copies. And there's different shades of gray. Like a 5 can have just a little bit above half the carbs of an 8. Like there's meaningful differences. But in rough numbers, 5 to 8 is Mediterranean. 1s are ketos. 2 to 3s are paleos. 2 is like borderline paleo keto. And then 9 aboves are higher carbs. So I was having, I was eating about like a 6 or 7, but I'm really a 2. And I was having over triple the amount of carbs I could tolerate. Within 1 week of changing my carb tolerance to my genetic capacity, the mood, digestion, energy stabilized. Now, going back to what I said about in the very beginning about my breakfast growing up, it wasn't just the junk, it wasn't the chemicals, it was just the sheer bombardment of carbs, the bombardment of it. And also my parents, because my cholesterol at age 6 was deemed too high, this is true, put me on a low-fat, high-carb diet. And my genes require more fat than other people.
Hey, hold on. Because your cholesterol level was high.
At age 6.
They put you on a high-carb, low-fat diet.
Yeah, high-carb for the 80s.
Fat and cholesterol,
exactly
right?
The wrong thing to do. That's exactly the wrong thing to do.
I can vouch for this. Yes. I can vouch for this.
Wow.
So yeah, wow, indeed. Yeah, I'm surprised I'm even alive, honestly. So you determine your carb tolerance, which then you end so many of these arguments over like, it's keto, it's like I had a client who was an amateur tennis player. Now, if you know anything about tennis players, they're fit. They are incredibly fit. This guy was playing elite tennis and all that, and then he got what I call, in my term, keto shamed. He got keto shamed into doing keto with all of his buddies. And he's telling me this, like before I'm about to give him his results, says, oh man, I tried keto and I interrupted him. Under no circumstances, according to your genes, should you ever be keto ever. And he's like, stopped and just stared at me. And he's like, I knew it. Oh my God. I was like fainting. I was feeling awful. I was like, yeah, you have a 13 out of 20, bro. You are a high carb diet. Keto is not for you. I'm keto. Me, I can do that. You, no, absolutely not. And so like there are high carb people. They exist. Along with the leprechauns and unicorns, they exist. And then you got the keto people also, but there's shades of gray in between. So you can actually determine based on this very specific type of genetics analysis, which you can't get through 23andMe or Ancestry, the duplicates of this AME1 gene. So that's like carb tolerance. Then you've got trigger foods for genetics.
I have a question, a personal question. So I didn't realize this. So my AME1 is allele-wise, it's TA. Meaning we don't know the number of copies because of the type of tests that I've done. We don't know. That said, based on the report that I have, it's told me that the TT variation tends to have a higher number of copies. The A variations, any A allele variation has a lower level, lower number of copies, or it's associated with the lower number. But based on this test, I don't actively know the type of diet that I should be on according to this genetic thing. So this is even telling us that the type of DNA test that you get can provide you with a deeper level of insight into what's happening. 23andMe is kind of the basic, right? It's just alleles and it's just across the top. We're not actually digging into the depth of these important markers. So
correct.
Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the different types of tests that people can get and why there's higher value in getting certain types of tests that can give you that insight.
Sure. So it all depends on what your goal is. So different tests have different objectives. Like we talked about genealogy, paternity, medical pathology testing, and then we're talking about functional genetics. if we're just talking about functional genetics, not the other three.
Yes, that's where I want to focus, is on the functional.
Yeah, if we're talking about just functional genetics, the ways to look at functional genetic tests is you want to look at those 4 criteria that Dr. Beaver figured out when you're coming to the health, well-being, longevity, and risk of chronic illness. Are they looking at the drivers? Are they looking at the genes that are upstream on those drivers? Is there general variation in the population? And is the research on the recommendations done on humans in top-tier journals? Then, from that information, you can then look at this scatter of highest priority rank order genes, and then look at what are the fewest number of lifestyle recommendations that benefit the most number of the highest priority genes. That way, you're not ending up doing 50 things, you're doing 10,
High value.
5,
High
in
value
order of
stuff.
priority.
Yes.
And you can actually know the order of priority. This is what I do. It's like I look at, say, something like sulforaphane, for example. Sulforaphane is a really big deal in the nutrigenomic world because it's one of the few things that upregulate the VDR receptors, precious few things that do that. It also helps with certain inflammatory genes and certain detox genes and so on. It's very, very, very important. I predicted 10 years ago, 10 years ago, I can't remember, that sulforaphane would eclipse turmeric as more important in the consciousness. And I still hold that prediction. And I can tell you based on the numbers, I can look at someone's genes and then I can say, okay, of the most important genes you've got, of the most important genes in your health and well-being profile, you've got like 24, I'm just pulling an example out of my head from one of my clients. You got 24 of those genes are red and yellow dots. Of those 24 red and yellow dots, in your case, sulforaphane helps 13 of those 24 red and yellow dots based on research done on humans. So therefore, I know that over half of the most important genes are benefited from this one thing. Oh, fish oil in the correct nutrigenomic dosing helps 10 out of your 24. So automatically I know sulforaphane is more important for this person, but then fish oil ain't bad. 10 out of 24 ain't bad. And then I could just go down the line with nutrients, diets, and lifestyle and see diminishing returns down to like, well, CoQ10, it's great from a nutrigenomic, it's only helping 2 out of the 24. So I'd rather you spend the money on sulforaphane than on CoQ10, for example. So if you have that's a way that you can really optimize your genetic report, is to minimize the number of things you do by maximizing the number of things those things do to the most important genes.
So this report that you're talking about is coming from FitGene.
Correct. Yeah. This is a company that I've run with for over 10 years.
Sure.
And I'm now the Western Hemisphere distributor. And I also train doctors and health coaches how to actually run this in their practice. I mean, if people want to do it through my DNA Decoder program, that's fine. But I'd much rather train health coaches and licensed practitioners how to do this themselves. Yeah.
So with that said, you're telling us what the gene allele is, not necessarily establishing what the epigenetic control over that gene is. So
when you're saying what influences why it went sideways?
No. It went sideways because that's the allele. That's that's what the code is.
Yeah.
Okay. Your DNA is showing this yellow gene. Okay. But you also have epigenetic control, whether it's DNA methylation at that site, whether you've got histone modifications that are limiting the amount to which that red gene is being expressed at all, or a green gene. You have the green gene, but it's methylated and you're not really producing it. So an miRNA that are degrading. Yes, you're producing that green gene's mRNA, but it's getting degraded and you're not making very much of it. So does FitGene have the ability to do that, to look at the epigenetics? And if not, then do you use like a True Diagnostics or somebody else to help inform how that individual's expression of those?
Okay. It's a great question. So FitGenes is looking at the gene alleles. It's not looking at proteomics or it's not looking at like I run mitochondria tests. So we're looking at like organic acids and amino acids. If that is separate labs, which I love and adore and have helped design. But the two of them ideally go together. And the way I describe how they go together is the genes tell you like how you want to optimally live and what you need to look out for and how to shore it up. But it doesn't tell you what's happening now. It does. It's whereas functional testing whether it's mitochondria or gut testing or proteomics, whatever it is, it's a thumbprint of what is in your system now. And you do the two together, that's ideal. And the reason why I'm focused on the genetic component is because I feel like that's the biggest missing piece and the biggest confusing piece that people everywhere can benefit from. And they get the test once and they've got the data for life. It's the single most high value test in the entire functional medicine world without even a close second, simply because of the time horizon of how valuable the data lasts. So I'm a big fan of people getting the additional testing if they've got the right person to interpret it, and they can marry the two together. And also, I would say, like, ideally, people are also doing a lifestyle analysis as well, because otherwise it can turn into just supplements for symptoms. You know, you're just creating an allopathic model, a pharmaceutical model, and using a natural intervention. And that's problematic for so many reasons. And it can be useful, but you're not changing your philosophy. So when you're running your genetics, you're looking at, I mentioned sulforaphane and I mentioned, fish oil, but the other things the reports talk about is like, what are the types of exercise you're optimized for? Do you need to focus more on recovery? Is like, for example, like in the exercise genes, it's are you a fast twitch, intermediate twitch, or a slow twitch, which really matters. I worked with a guy literally last week. He was a long 20,000 miles a year professional cyclist. He's a fast twitch guy. He got so sick and so injured doing the completely wrong sport for him. Then there's people who are hyper-inflammatory, that they get exercise-induced injury from muscle inflammation. And there's people who've got collagen genes that have red and yellow dot variants, that they're more at risk of injury simply because their collagen isn't as strong. So for those people, it's not just collagen nutrition. It's you got to focus on recovery as much as you do exercise. You can't CrossFit this.
Yeah, that's exactly. I had a nutritionist that was working with us in the past, who was a high-end soccer player. Like, she was phenomenal, but when she did her genetic testing, found that she was fast twitch muscle specifically. And it realized that it was all of this chronic 20 miles of running during each match 3-4 times a week was actually contributing heavily towards her breaking down, because she wasn't built for that sport. And so 100%. It was a big change.
She may have been better off being the goalie.
Exactly.
Or the two people that protect the goalie, or three people. I can't remember. The soccer fans will be screaming at me right now if I don't get the right
European football.
European football. It's like she just was it put in the wrong position possibly even the wrong sport entirely. So you've got the genes for the lifestyle longevity and chronic, and you line up what are the lifestyle changes, diet, nutrition, lifestyle, that do the fewest number of them to do the most amount of influence. Then you've got the dietary genes, and then the dietary genes, you're looking at the carb tolerance we talked about. You really want to look at your sensitivity to lactose, alcohol, caffeine, histamines, food allergens in general, not specific allergens, but the allergenicity, reactivity as such. So this is where if people have a high kind of like of the 5 or half dozen or so allergenic genes, if they're like an average of red and yellow dot, I just like go on an elimination diet just to get started, just because it's logical to do that. And then like an antihistamine diet, if people are sensitive to histamine. By the way, histamine diets are really hard to put people on, because like avocados are high in histamine and other, quote, health foods. But, for people who struggle with how to do an antihistamine diet, I figured out the way. Histamine's a bucket. And just the more foods and the more variety, the more quantity of specific foods, you fill the bucket. So if you reduce the variety and the quantity, you're still winning. So I tell people who look at the list of high histamine foods and they have a full-on panic attack, I'm like, just pick the top 10. I'm just going to 80-20 this. Just pick the top 10 foods that are high in histamine that you enjoy, either convenience or you find that are cost-effective, or that you find is just you enjoy. Keep those top 10 and just cut the rest. And then it's totally winnable. So you got dietary genes about your eating behaviors. So some people don't feel full on normal amounts of food. These are like satiety genes. And so for these people, and when people, oh my God, I can't feel full, I might as well give up, pass the drink. It's like, no, we're not going to careen into nihilistic fatalism here. You have this risk for overeating. So here's a list of how you can control your environment, not your willpower.
Can you
control your environment, not your willpower?
Can you name off some of those high-end satiety genes based on the fact that we've got the GLP-1 agonist world happening right now?
You got the leper. It's a terrible it's a terrible name to say it's a leper gene. You got the what's the proper name for it? Let me get the
I
actual.
called you out here on the spot. I'm sorry.
No. There's because I think in clusters.
Yes.
That's the thing. Is like what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking in clusters, like because I can see all of them in my head I can see them all in my head, like all the things lined up. They are leper. Yeah, this is I had a kitschy name. I didn't want to say the wrong. It's the leper gene, the fatso gene, which is really cruel. FTO, it's the FTO. They call it the fatso gene. Leper1, fatso, and the MC4R are the three major genes for satiety. So if people have variations and they're going to overeat, so you help them with strategies that mitigate the risk of overeating. Then you've got people who are genetically hypersensitive to sugar consumption and sugar cravings, which are separate. So some people are like, you got sugar consumption, that's GLUT2. And you've got the sweet taste perceptions, that's the TAS1R genes. And so people who are craving sugar may not be of the same genes as people who overconsume sugar. So you've got people have different realities around how they navigate the flavors and tastes of food. There's even people that crave the flavor and texture of fat. This is the CD36 gene, where people have variations. They crave fat as a flavor and a texture. And then there's people who are averse to bitter flavors, the TAS2R38 genes. You're raising your hand?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So if people who are averse to bitter, they're called super tasters, they can statistically eat about 100 to 150 pounds fewer bitter vegetables a year because they're averse to the bitter flavor. But they also can avoid alcohol and tonic water and coffee.
Cilantro and coffee. I don't drink coffee, too bitter.
Yeah.
Dark chocolate, avoid it.
Yep.
Anything that's bitter, but I do like tonic water.
Yeah. So here's a couple of things. I had to put in extra slides to explain the bitter version. Some people look at the list of things that are bitter and like, wait, but I like half of those. That means the whole gene test is wrong. Oh my God. No. Couple of things. One, if you're cooking the vegetables, there's 4 separate ways I identified to mute the bitter flavor in vegetables. Well, it's like cooking in fat or cooking garlic and onions. Like you can be muting the bitter vegetables anyway. Number 2, modern vegetables have been bred to be sweeter over the decades. So they're not as bitter as they could be. Number 3, which is maybe your thing, is that you may have an emotional override. So for some people, whether it's the vegetables, like here comes the plane with asparagus was actually a good experience for them. And so they have this emotional override. Or there's something about the experience of the tonic water that is emotionally you're overriding it, or maybe it's a texture that's overriding it. So like you're still tasting the bitter, but there may be another component that's overriding it.
I do cut it with lime and a little bit of cranberry.
That may be enough. That may be enough to cut it. Yeah. I mean, bless your heart if you're downing it straight. I don't know what man show you're on.
Florida, I got to avoid the malaria.
Right. So you got you got carb tolerance, food triggers, and eating behaviors. And then with diet, just to round out one more thing about the diet of genetics is going to bring it back to functional testing, the other type of testing, metabolic testing. So I say genetics is the foundation. I mean that literally. It doesn't mean it's the only layer to look at. There's another layer above genetics, which I call the metabolic layer. And you can have a phenomenon. Now, you've come across people that said, I've tried every diet, doesn't work. I think I figured out why that is. You can have what's called, and I coined this term, metabolic barbed wire that's wrapping your genetics. So if someone is a high carb person genetically, but they metabolically are dealing with a gut infection like Candida, carbs is going to backfire because metabolically, you've got this Candida barbed wire wrapping your genetics. So too, if you're a low carb person like me, but I have a problem with my gallbladder, my pancreatic lipase, my carnitine shuttle, the mitochondria itself not being able to burn fat for some reason, if I can't digest, absorb, shuttle, or metabolize fats, I have a metabolic barbed wire problem with fats, even though genetically I crave them, metabolically I can't process them. So what do is that you find out, first off, you find out your genetic baseline. Then if you do, this is what happens when people have metabolic barbed wire. They try out the genetics and they like plateau in their results. Like, what's going on? I'm plateauing. I've got certain results, I'm plateauing. That's a red flag to go get other functional metabolic testing to find out what barbed wire metabolically is wrapping your genetics. And you may have to switch to a different lifestyle, diet, and protocol to deal with the barbed wire temporarily once it's defanged. Then you go back to your genetic baseline. Yeah. So metabolic barbed wire, this is a massive discussion. I maybe, if I'm going to be remembered for like a handful of things, metabolic barbed wire is in the top running of one of my frameworks to answer this riddle. People have been suffering, including me, of like, why doesn't any diet work for me? And I think it's just the conflict between the genetics and the current metabolism. I think that's what's going on.
Or the current environment driving this.
Environment influencing, environment influencing, which will affect your metabolism in other ways, not just diet. Yeah.
This has been like a masterclass for me. I love this. We are understanding that there are so many different layers that need to be looked at in both an acute, like when a patient first comes and talks to you, what we're looking at is, hey, it's not just your genetics. Your genetics lay the foundational structure. It's the bones of the entire thing. And without the bones, you can't build the human around it, right? The bones give the structure. But then we have epigenetics, which builds the musculature, which allows for the bones to move in a certain way. And then we have the mitochondrial function and the optimization on energy and metabolism that are going to power the musculature to function and get the nutrients to where they need to go with the vasculature, with the blood flow, etc. And we have the communication piece with the nerves being built on top of this. And so the layers are there. And then we've got the the microbiome, and we've got all of the important, what's living in the gut, what nutrients are getting in, and how these things are all getting shuttled. And it's a layer of like, it's layered on top of one another. And so there's not one single test that is going to give you an exact output as to what is going on and what needs to happen. But for me, this is where I love this, because now we understand that there's a structural component that needs to be looked at, and then there's epigenetics that needs to be looked at, and there's other layers on top that are more environmental. And based on all of these things, in an acute circumstance, you may change your diet versus what an optimal diet is for you, and what your exercise and movement patterns should be. Is it more aerobic, long-term kind of, should you be a cyclist, or should you be more focused on short burst interval style fast training? And all of these pieces can essentially be put down to, what does this individual need? This is the N of one medicine, and understanding what N of one medicine is in the context of, let's bring you from suboptimal towards optimal, right? It's not the acute phase, the acute situation that modern medicine does, which they do perfectly fine. And I'm not here to down anything there. But if somebody is seeking out being that N of one and wanting to get better and wanting to live their life as fully as possible based on their genetics, based on their internal structure, in the same way that you have figured out what works best for you, what works best for your patients, this is how you need to approach it. If you're looking at getting the testing, if you're looking at investing in getting the testing done, so that you can then have this very clear pathway on an individualized basis on how to move forward. Does that sound pretty overarching theme?
That sounds like a great summary. I'd say that the only other piece I would add in on the exercise that I think is one of the big, I do whole podcasts on this, that people miss the genetics can reveal if you really need to focus on recovery.
Yes.
From exercise. And a lot of people just fixate, I want to exercise more. It's like, do you? Or do you want to exercise and recover? And I see this a lot I actually gave a lecture once at a Fit Genes conference called Exercise-Induced Obesity, which was a very specific genetic combination of hyperinflamers who over-exercised and then triggered a net massive pro-inflammatory effect, so they started to retain water. And you see this in CrossFit all the time. You walk in, I can know who's an over-inflamer by walking any CrossFit. Certain individuals, they're strong, but they don't look cut. They're just have this layer of water weight on top of them. You can't see their definition. Is because they're over-inflamed, and that they need to change their recovery practices and alter their exercise so they don't become net pro-inflammatory. That's a whole other discussion we can have, but like recovery is one of the biggest. I've had to hold people accountable and like totally change their approach to lifestyle just from this genetics test. That like they completely change their exercise life.
Yeah, we're all about this recovery piece because we're so focused on the autonomic piece, shifting from sympathetic into parasympathetic. And some people move more slowly through there. And I feel like there's almost a likely correlation between people that have difficulty shifting from sympathetic to parasympathetic are the ones that require more of that like structured, rigid, recovery-based protocol. And they're more likely to benefit from vagus nerve stimulation. And they're more likely to benefit from a lot of the tools and therapies from a lifestyle perspective that can enable that shift to occur more readily. Sorry, JP, I cut you off there.
Yeah. So how do we get for our audience more information about this, about you? I mean, I could see you got, the www.drsamshay.com, which is a great way, I'm sure, to get to know more about you. But FitGene, what are the touch points that they should be?
If anyone here listening is a certified health coach or aspiring to be one, or a practitioner that wants to run this type of genetics test in their practice, they can go to FitGenes USA, FitGenes USA.com. If they're in the Western Hemisphere or Europe, or if they're in Australia, they can go to, or the South Pacific, they can go to fitgenes.com. But the Western Hemisphere and Europe, like that's how I help train and facilitate practitioners. If they're in Australia and New Zealand, I also train the practitioners there as well, but virtually. So that's for the professionals. For the individuals who just are either like curious or they want to optimize or it's lay public and they just want to get their genes done, they can go to either my website, drsamshay.com, and click on DNA Decoded, or they can go to the DNA Decoded, THEDNA Decoded.com. Put the in there. The DNAdecoded.com, and they can see the program I have. They can order the swabs, get the test results. They get access to my library of about 200 or so videos. I also have a group coaching model called the Gold Program. People, they want to use the code GOLD100. They get $100 off the Gold Program. Brings it down to the price of the Silver. And it's a group coaching with me once a month. And that's the easiest way to actually engage with me on genetics, is through that group model. And there's also a 6-month implementation program, and you get the reports that explain what your reality is in your genetics. So I love helping the lay public, and I also really want to help practitioners and health coaches really be able to simplify and make more effective genetics in their practice, and like reducing interpretation time down from like 3 hours to a fraction of that, because the reports are so clear because they follow this prioritized format.
I love that. Prioritization is going to make that so much simpler for practitioners and for lay people to understand what needs to be done and prioritize things out. And then based on that, make better decisions for your personal health, period.
I think this is such a better entry point for people than trying to go to 23andMe and getting this massive set of they have no idea what to do with it. You've really broken it down into something that these are the 150 genes you need to worry about in 2 buckets of 75, and we're going to tell you exactly how these specific alleles that you have, you need to manage it. It's like literally it's the instruction manual for your body.
Totally.
I think it's a great entry point for most people. If you haven't done this before, if you haven't really looked at your genes, you've sort of been flying blind. It's a great way to get some visibility into who you are, not your personality, but into who you are physically. And if you want to live forever, you better know
what we lost you there, JP.
What car you're driving.
There we go. Wonderful. Yes, I agree. I think this is actually far more actionable, which is key. You like getting the testing done is one thing, right? Knowing is one part of it, but actually doing it and implementing and having a structure that you want to focus on there, I think is far more important because that's where the real transformation happens. That's where the real change takes place. So I am absolutely thrilled with the information that you shared today. It's making me want to go back and like pull the transcript and be like, these are the things that I need to look at for myself, and go back and get myself a new Fit Genes test, because I would love to get deeper insight into what's happening for me personally, as I'm sure so many of our listeners would as well. So those websites we will list in the show notes. So take a look at those and click the links and go and check this out. If you're really interested in doing this, I cannot explain just how much of a masterclass this was for everybody. So please dig in and understand just how important these structural components are to your overall health. I think this has been wonderful. Any final thoughts, Dr. Shay?
I just want to offer that if you're going to prioritize one test, do genetics, because the value of this test is the good for life. And you learn so much as the foundation, not to the exclusion of other tests, but it is the foundation to your personal blueprint. And you can answer so many questions, and then you can build on top of it from there. But I would have done anything to have this test. Like, I'm 45 now. I would have done anything to have this test 40 years ago. I got it 10 years ago, but my whole life would have been, I would have, my physical health, everything would have been totally different if I actually known my genes. And so, and one of my favorite things is I see families just test the whole family all at once. And just like they now know going forward what to do for everyone, and everyone's on board. So that's what I would say. I don't want, like the wounded healer, I don't want people to suffer the way that I suffered. I really don't.
Yeah.
And this is, to me, the most cost-effective and scalable way to help people the most for the longest period of time.
I love that.
Genetics.
I love that. This has been wonderful. It's an honor to have had you on. I'm sure at some point we will have you back to dig deeper into specific topics and maybe to go over my results at some point, which would be amazing.
Yeah, no, I actually do that. So for podcasters or the people, like they actually run their Fit Genes, and then I come back and I just do a live review of their genetics.
We just teed it up.
And just
Let's do it.
I've done that before. Yeah,
I love this. This has been great.
I'm in.
Thank you again for joining us, for sharing your knowledge, your brilliance with us. Whoever's listening, if you got to this point, share this with like 3 people who you think could utilize this information. And I'm sure you will use this information to upgrade your health. I think this has been wonderful. And just share this with anybody who you think could utilize this information to upgrade their health. And we'll catch you all on the next one.